Renee Martine Lamanna was a 35-year-old from Fresh Meadows, New York. She was highly intelligent and fluent in many languages. On January 8, 1994, Renee's sister took her to her home in Ocean City, New Jersey after Renee suffered a mental breakdown. But Renee managed to escape, running off. She was later seen at a restaurant, then over a year later at a car dealership. After that, she was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. I live on an island. Yes, I know it's called, quote-unquote, Madeira Beach. And of course, there is a beach there. But if you look at a satellite picture, you'll see the piece of land I live on is not connected to the mainland of Florida by anything but man-made bridges. And this was no more evident than when Hurricane Irma swept through in September 2017. If you wanted off the island, you had to get out before the drawbridges went up. If not, you were stuck. As bad as that situation may sound, an island is just about the perfect situation if you are looking for a missing person, especially if you can start the search quickly enough. There are only so many directions to go. There are only so many modes of transportation to leave the island, and each of those ways is heavily monitored. That all presupposes, though, that law enforcement cares to do anything. In Renee Lamanna's case, she disappeared from an island. There were only 3 bridges off it. They could have been blocked, but the police did nothing. And witnesses say she made it to the mainland, having been seen multiple times since 7 p.m. January 8, 1994. And all these years later, her family still searches for Renee, the woman from the island. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Goodsite, charlieproject.org. Renee Lamanna is one of the most cultured and educated missing persons to be covered on Unfound. She held multiple degrees and spoke 5 languages. Renee traveled with the Peace Corps to Africa and elsewhere, and helped many immigrants, including her boyfriend's family, establish roots in the United States. However, throughout her adult life, she struggled with panic attacks, although they never seemed to interfere with her work or education. Yet during the day of January 8, 1994, someone found her aimlessly wandering the streets of Queens, New York City. Renee was taken to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. Her sister Margaret was called to pick Renee up after a few hours. The sister brought her to her home in Ocean City, New Jersey. However, Margaret, noticing that Renee was still suffering from some kind of mental breakdown, intended to commit her to a local hospital for an extended stay. But before Margaret could do that, Renee ran out the back door of the home. A friend of Margaret's went out into the dark night to track Renee down, while Margaret called 911. Within 20 minutes, various divisions of law enforcement were on the scene, but Renee wasn't found in either the ocean or on the streets of Ocean City, New Jersey. However, at 11 p.m. that night, a canine officer discovered a bartender in Summers Point who had seen Renee sit down for a drink at approximately 8:30 p.m., about 90 minutes after she ran from the house. However, she had left before the officer got there. Over the next year and a half, Renee was seen on the New York subway and at a car dealership in Northfield, New Jersey. No credible sightings have been documented since May 1995. Issues complicating the investigation of this case are Renee's ability to blend in with different communities due to her language abilities and cultural knowledge, the lack of interest shown by the Ocean City Police in 1994, and the fact that eyewitness accounts in all types of crimes or disappearances are notoriously unreliable. Renee's family believes she is alive and could be in a situation where she doesn't know who she is, or she may be unable to contact them. The guest for this episode is Renee's sister, Margaret Lamanna. Unfound news. Did you get your Unfound newsletter a few days ago? Yep, it went out. I covered a lot of things going on with Unfound and updated the readers on the Tom Brown disappearance, which seems to have new information happening almost every day now. If you didn't get the newsletter, let me know. I'll put you on the list. Next, while I'm here in Pennsylvania seeing my parents, yes, I'm here if you didn't know, I plan to meet some of the guests who've been on Unfound. Also, I plan to visit a couple of the spots where disappearances have taken place. One's both covered and not covered on Unfound. I'll let you know what I encounter. In fact, I'll probably take some pictures. Finally, Unfound had representation at Arkansas's Missing Persons Day this past Tuesday. Emily, my assistant, was there wearing an Unfound shirt. She took some pictures and got to meet families of missing people. We hope to have some of them on Unfound in the near future. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, Podomatic, Stitcher, Podbean, and Spotify. Concerning Facebook, please join us on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern for the Unfound live show on the Unfound page. The email address, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. Please check out the Secret Stephen Kocher episode. The website at Trib Total Media, triblive.com/news/unfound. Unfound has Patreon and PayPal accounts. Your contributions provide for many of the items guests have received so far. I cannot thank all of Unfound supporters enough. This week I need to thank Jackie, Lynn, and Dan. Unfound merchandise, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 on Amazon, in both paperback and ebook form. Let's see if we can get some more reviews for all of those books. The playing cards, go to makeplayingcards.com/sell/Unfound podcast. Shirts for almost all of Unfound's cases at unfound-podcast.myshopify.com. This includes the flagship t-shirt, The First Year Cases, that has a collage of everyone from Suzanne Lyle to Jennifer Wilkerson in it. And please mention Unfound on all true crime Facebook pages and other websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Renee Lamanna, Margaret Lamanna. Margaret, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Let's start here. Tell the listeners a little bit about your sister, Renee. How many siblings do you have? Were you the older sister, younger sister?
Okay, Renee is my younger sister. She was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Our parents, now deceased, were Anne and Frank Lamanna. Renee celebrated her Holy Communion at St. Lucy's Parish in Scranton. She was musically talented and played the cello. We had a younger brother, Mark, a violin protege, who died of cancer at the age of 14. Renee is a graduate of Abington Heights High School in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania, and the University of Scranton. She holds 3 degrees, including a master's degree in history. She was a Fulbright finalist. She speaks 5 languages, including English, French, Arabic, Portuguese, and Farsi. She was a trainee in the U.S. Peace Corps in Morocco. She traveled internationally and immersed herself in learning about other cultures. Her career included various sales and marketing positions in real estate, retail, and investment services. She was a resident of Fresh Meadows, Queens, New York, at the time of her disappearance, where she had lived for 10 years.
How did she learn all of those languages? How do you go about doing something like that?
Well, 3 of the languages she studied at the University of Scranton, and the others she studied at a university in the Middle East in preparation for her internship in the Peace Corps.
And she just had a knack for it? I mean, obviously, very intelligent young woman. Just had a knack for the languages on top of that, though, it seems.
Yes.
Huh.
She was very gifted in her multi-language ability.
Mm-hmm. I would say so. Sounds like a very busy young woman as well, having all those degrees and taking an interest in staying in the Middle East for a while. Very busy.
Yes.
Okay. What were maybe some of her interests outside of her education, hobbies? Uh, what, how would you portray that?
Renee was very interested in Middle Eastern culture and Middle Eastern languages. She was also a cellist. She studied flamenco dancing. Um, she was very vibrant, very lively, um, and very much interested in political science. Her bachelor's degree and master's degrees were in political science and then in languages.
Okay, so we have a woman with a diverse range of interests.
Yes.
And how did and where do you think she got her interest? Maybe in the Middle East, where Middle Eastern culture. Where do you think that came from?
I have no idea, except that she had always been fascinated through her political science studies in the Middle East, Middle East political, I guess, social and political issues were of interest to her. And then the languages followed suit. Unfortunately, she fell in love with an Afghan taxi driver and a perpetual student, Quadratullah Sabari. He used the name Robert Sabari. She studied the Quran. She became vegan, cooked Afghan food, prayed 5 times a day, and wore a headscarf. She obviously was not dancing, so she gave up flamenco dancing. She did not wear any makeup or jewelry. In fact, we found out later that she pawned all her jewelry. She housed and helped Afghans learn English, develop job skills, and become employed. She devoted 10 years and all of her resources to helping Robert's friends and relatives when they arrived in the United States. This devotion took a toll on Renee. Renee was very vibrant, very active, very multicultural and multilingual, and then she became singly focused on this, Islamic culture and this Afghan environment. She grew mentally, physically, and financially drained. As I said, she pawned her jewelry. She stopped wearing colorful clothing. She wasn't dancing anymore because this was not allowed in the culture.
Why do you think this all? Why do you think this all happened?
We gave all her money, and the money I was sending her for only her to their cause, most was sent overseas. I had no idea. This was an ill-fated relationship. And
Sounds
I think
like it.
what happened was Robert and his culture took over Renee's life. And again, she grew mentally, physically drained and lost quite a bit of weight. She became anorectic. Her weight dropped to 98 pounds. She had a nervous breakdown, and she was found wandering the streets of Queens on January 8th of 1994 after her boyfriend wanted to end their 10-year relationship.
I'd like to explore a little bit about this relationship, being that it did, as you portray, maybe seemingly drive her to once again become anorexic and maybe have some of these mental health issues that we're going to talk about here in a second. She was a very independent woman, very educated. What do you think it was about this guy that kind of caused her to change? Maybe a little bit of brainwashing going on, or how would you explain it?
Yeah, I think it was one of those obsessive, single directional relationships where one person is, more committed than another. And I think she was clearly more in love with him than he was with her. And she thought that by changing and adopting his culture and helping his friends and family assimilate, that she would, be more lovable to him and that it would be a more workable situation. So she gave up everything
It sounds like how did the two even meet? She's multilingual. She's going to the Middle East. She's a cellist, flamenco dancer, and she ends up dating a taxi driver. It seems like a strange combination.
He was a very intelligent and very entrepreneurial young man, and we're still in contact. His family had a carpet factory in Kabul, and they were exiled to Pakistan during the war. He had a very large family. Many of his friends and family he brought over and helped situate them, and Renee was a very integral part of that. He had a bachelor's degree and was seeking additional degrees, and both of them were going to Bronx Community College at night. So he was driving by day, and he owned his own taxi medallion, which was quite an accomplishment for
Sure, those aren't easy to get.
Yeah, he was very entrepreneurial, and in addition to having the taxi medallion, going to school at night with Renee, owning a lovely condominium in Fresh Meadows, which was covered with the oriental carpets that he had smuggled out from the factory in Kabul, he also owned several fruit vending stands in Lower Manhattan, which he staffed with his immigrant friends that he was bringing over. So this was not just an ordinary,
taxi driver,
blue-collar worker. He was a tall, dark, handsome, sophisticated, and entrepreneurial young man who was attractive to Renee and who was attracted to Renee.
Right.
And they met amongst this multicultural environment in New York and started dating, and then they ended up living together.
And over that time, how long were they dating before she disappeared?
They were together for 10 years.
Wow. And during those 10 years, as you've already explained, you kind of saw that, could we call it a deterioration or a change in Renee over that time?
I saw a transformation from a vibrant, joyful woman to someone who was singly focused on the Afghan culture and, the Muslim faith. Not which is bad. I mean, there's nothing, no drugs, no alcohol, prayerful, but she was housebound. And these women don't drive, they don't dance, they don't wear makeup, they don't wear bright colored clothes, and they're pretty much housebound. So she went from a very outgoing, extroverted individual to a housebound, prayerful, reclusive, depressive individual. Right. So it was alarming to me and to my parents, and we wanted to stop it. And she declared her love for Robert, and Robert his love for Renee. And there was only so much we could do because she was an adult. So in spite of our efforts, this relationship continued way longer than it should have. During the course of Labor Day weekend, my parents came from Philadelphia to my home in South Jersey. Robert and Renee drove in his car to South Jersey. We had a lovely Labor Day weekend, and we went to the waterfront restaurant and bar in Somers Point, New Jersey, to the upper bar. We all had iced tea. Of course, they don't drink. And we had, typical Labor Day barbecue type food. Our friend Dolores Beck was tending bar there. And Renee seemed subdued. She was 98 pounds at the time, very anorectic, very thin, but she did not have any signs of an acute psychiatric emergency. There were no red flags other than her obvious, physical state, but there were no mental red flags at that time, no signs. They left early. Instead of leaving Monday night, they left Monday morning, Labor Day, because they had to prepare for their courses and their examinations. But on January 8th, now during the course of several months, October and November, we were in constant communication. Renee was very, very close to we're a very close family. And Renee was very close to my mother and called her pretty much daily, or at least 3 or 4 times a week. I was very, very busy with my career and my profession, and so I only spoke to Renee maybe 1 or 2 times a week. But I did get a phone call from Robert, and he said Renee was not acting normally. And I said that, call my mother, she'll be right there. He said he wasn't really sure what was going on, but that she was spending a lot of time in her bedroom, rolled up in a ball, not eating, not drinking, very depressive. And I thought that was alarming. That was 24 hours before her disappearance.
So that would have been on January 7th then? January 7th?
Yeah, on January 7th.
Okay.
Yeah, and he had his wisdom teeth were extracted. And on January 8th, he had packing in his mouth. He couldn't really speak clearly. He was home from the dentist. He had declared a couple days before that their relationship was over and that she needed to move out, find a job, and leave, which I think precipitated her being in a somewhat bedridden state. My mother never got the message, and I got it really just a couple of hours before all this happened. So on January 8th.
So was he cheating? Let's just stay on that for a second. Was he cheating on her? I mean,
we didn't know at the time whether he was or he wasn't, but we know that she had a nervous breakdown on January 8th. That was the date after she was laying in bed, a couple of days after he had declared their relationship over and the day of his dental work. She fled their apartment barefoot in sub-zero weather, wearing a red silk Afghan wedding outfit. And she was taken by ambulance that was called by a Good Samaritan to the psychiatric emergency room of Queens Hospital Center on 8286 164th Street in Jamaica, New York. Now, after a brief evaluation by an intern there, Dr. Ankinko, she was released. He called me and he said, Dr. Lamanna, your sister is here. I don't see anything wrong with her. And I said, wait a minute. How did she get to your ER? Put her on the phone. And he said, well, she came in by ambulance. She was barefoot. She had no coat, no gloves, no money, no identification. And she was wearing a red silk pajama set. And I said, doctor, with all due respect, I find this abnormal behavior and certainly worthy of the Baker Act, which would require you to hold her until she's evaluated by a board-certified psychiatrist. And he said, well, we don't have any beds. I'm in the ER. She's alert and oriented and appropriate. I did a complete neurological and mental examination on her. She appears to be normal. Would you like to talk to her?
He didn't say anything about her being 98 pounds or being anorexic or anything? That would not have come up in some discussion like that?
Well, he didn't know what her normal weight was, but she was very skinny, and I said, she's anorectic. She hasn't been eating.
Okay.
And she got on the phone, and I said, Renee, what's going on? And she said, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I said, well, why don't you stay there? I will be there. I just got up from Florida. I have pneumonia, but I'll be there. In a matter of a couple of hours, I'll be there. Wait till I get there. No, I do not want to stay in the hospital. I do not want to stay here. So the phone passed back to Dr. Ankinko, and Dr. Ankinko said, it doesn't matter if she wants to stay or not. we do not have a bed. And I said, this doesn't fit. Who is your attending chief of psychiatry? And he said, Dr. Glenn A. Martin is the hospital's attending psychiatrist. And I said, please get Dr. Martin on the phone. Let me talk to Dr. Martin. I insist that he come in and evaluate Renee. And that never happened. Dr. Martin never called me. They never made contact with the attending physician or the attending psychiatrist. I only had an opportunity to speak to the intern in the ER. They wouldn't let me speak to the attending in the ER, let alone the chief psychiatrist. They didn't have any bed. They refused to hold her in the ER, and they said they were going to let her go. Now, in desperation, I asked a friend, Nina, who lives in New York City, to leave her apartment, hop in a cab, and get up there right away, because I didn't want her wandering the streets again in sub-zero weather, and bring her to her home in Manhattan. And Nina did. Nina brought her to Manhattan, and she said that in the cab, Renee kept trying to jump out. She says, I want to go. I want to go. I don't want to come to your apartment. I want to go. Let me go. And Nina struggled.
Say where she wanted to go? She just wanted to get out.
She just wanted out. She wanted out. So Nina struggled with her. Got her back to her apartment in Manhattan, and she called me, and she said, you've got a situation here. This is an acute psychiatric emergency. She's paranoid. She's agitated. She's in a flight mode. And I said, call 911. Let's get her restrained and get her to an emergency room in Manhattan, and I'm on my way. And Renee said, no. I heard her in the background. No, I refuse to go to an ER. I'll come to see you. So I had a friend, Dr. Creasy, who is no longer alive, and he got a sedan, hired a sedan, and he picked Renee up at Nina's apartment in Manhattan and accompanied her to my home in Ocean City, New Jersey. So quite a bit of time has passed here. She was in the ER, I would say, a good 6 hours for the evaluation. They said there was nothing wrong with her. They gave her hospital-issued slippers, and Nina gave her a large white sweatshirt and a coat and socks. And so when she arrived in my home in Ocean City, New Jersey, and I had resolving pneumonia and was quite ill at the time, my parents had just left Philadelphia and moved to Florida for the winter months. Renee had never been to their new home in Florida. So Renee arrived at my home at 2519 Wesley Avenue in Ocean City. And she arrived with Bill Creasy, Dr. Creasy, our friend, in a leased, hired sedan. And Dr. Creasy was also was sick that day, and he couldn't stay. And I said, Bill, how was she? He said she wanted to leave. She wanted to jump out. We had to lock the doors to prevent her from jumping out. But then she fell asleep, and she was fine. And
was she, if I may ask, did you say, was she hallucinating or anything? And she just otherwise she knew what was going on.
She said she was appropriate. Her conversation was appropriate. She seemed somewhat exhausted from all of this activity. She slept most of the time, but her initial reaction was to flee. She wanted to leave Nina. She wanted to leave Bill. She wanted to run. And then she settled down, fell asleep, and arrived at my home. Okay. When she arrived in my home, she was wearing the socks that Nina gave her, the hospital-issued green, slippers. She had the red silk Afghan pajama outfit on, the large white sweatshirt Nina had given her, and an off-white winter coat. She arrived at my home. Bill said he was quite ill and he couldn't stay, and would I mind if he left in the sedan and went back to his home? And I said no, that was fine. And I had called a mutual friend of Renee's and mine, named Paul, who was strong. I specifically selected him because I thought he was physically strong, and I knew that we would at some point have to restrain her. While she was en route to my home, I notified 2 psychiatric emergency rooms. One was the Psychiatric Intervention Center, PIP, at the Atlantic Care Hospital in Atlantic City, and the other one was down in Cape May Courthouse. So I notified 2 psychiatric intervention centers that we would be bringing Renee into either location, depending on the logistics.
And she wouldn't know, but this is something you would never tell her. You were just going to keep that like a secret,
of course
I suppose.
Not. Yeah. Our
okay.
plan was to restrain her, throw her in Paul's car, and get her to one of the 2 ERs, or to call 911, depending on the scenario.
Sure.
Now, this was sub-zero weather. As you know, it was 17 degrees that night in South Jersey. Ocean City is a barrier island. It has 3 entrances: a bridge on the Summers Point Longport end. That's the southernmost bridge. Then there's a bridge on 9th Street, and then there's a bridge on that was the northernmost bridge. The bridge on 9th Street, and then a bridge in the southernmost area on 34th Street. So there were 3 entrances and 3 exits to this barrier island. This was January 8th. This is a resort island. Typically in the summer at peak, about 150,000 people. On that night, no more than 15,000 year-round residents were there. It was desolate. It was bitter, bitter cold. And when she arrived in my home at 7:01 p.m., it was pitch black. Now, the home is on the beach. So on one side, I have the ocean, the sand in the ocean. On the other side, I have the streets, and then the 3 exits off the island. She arrived at 7:01. I'm sorry. She arrived. I'm confused about the time.
That's all right.
She arrived at about 6:15 p.m. Okay, 6:15 she arrived, and then at 7:01 p.m. she dashed out my front door toward the beach into pitch darkness. But before that, let me describe how she arrived. I said that she had the green slippers from the hospital, the white socks, the red silk Afghan outfit, the white T-shirt, the white sweatshirt from Nina, and the white winter coat from Nina. She was catatonic when she arrived. She was anorectic. She was catatonic. But she was dazed and almost in a sleep-like, trance-like state when she arrived. Again, to reiterate, no drugs or alcohol with Renee at any time. Okay. They did not medicate her in the emergency room at Queens. So she was just somnolent in a trance-like state. And I thought it would be very easy. She seemed very subdued and listless. I thought it would be very easy for Paul and I to restrain her and to get her to one of the 2 emergency rooms. Dr. Creasy left. He was not feeling well, so he left in the sedan. I was alone with Renee and Paul. I thought the situation was very manageable because she seemed half asleep, just not with it at all. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would be very easy to subdue her at 98 or less pounds, no problem. She was hungry. She said, I haven't eaten. And I said, let me order from your favorite takeout restaurant, whatever you would like, and we placed an order. The food arrived within about 20 minutes. So she arrived about a little after 6, around 6:15. The food arrived about 15 minutes later. She twirled her fork in the food. I don't think she really ate more than one mouthful of what she ordered. And she said, I really want to lay down. So I said to Paul, go and draw her bath. Let's get her in some warm clothes. And I figured that would be the point. Put her in the tub, get her out, dry her, get her some, flannel pajamas, wrap her up in a robe, and then literally wrap her up, throw her in the car, and get her to one of these ERs or to call 911.
Yeah.
She looked to me like she was just about to go to sleep. So I thought our moment had arrived. Paul went to the bathroom to draw a warm bath. I turned my head for a split second to load the dishes into the dishwasher and put her food back into the refrigerator because she had barely touched it. And she dashed out the beachfront door.
Do you think that she might have been playing a little possum on that, pretending to be catatonic when she was trying to fool you?
Well, I think she was somnolent, but I think she was planning her exit very strategically.
Sure.
So I ran after her, grabbed her arm. My left arm grabbed her right arm, and I squeezed her really tight, and she dug her nails into my arm. And she looked at me as if no words were exchanged, but it was a flight or fright look, as if to say, I'm fleeing. I'm running.
But she didn't say anything. There was no words, just a look.
Not a word.
Oh.
Not a word.
Okay.
She went from almost asleep to in full flight, like in a split second, like a light switch was flipped on the wall. Okay. Paint the picture again. Now, I had when she arrived, I took off the white coat, of course, and handed her a robe to put on. And so she had a robe over the white sweatshirt, the red pajamas, the white socks, and the hospital-issued slippers when Paul was drawing the bath when she fled.
Yeah.
I called 911 immediately. It was pitch black. It was 17 degrees, but with the wind chill factor, I had quick calculated that she had less than 10 minutes to survive. I figured she had run into the ocean to commit suicide or ran in the other way to flee.
Yeah.
Called 911, called the Ocean City Police Department, called the Coast Guard was my second phone call. And then my third phone call was to the Cape May K-9 unit. 3 calls very, very quickly, and I screamed for Paul to run into his car, which he ran into his car, and he started to drive with flashlights. So Paul's in the car, speeding away with a flashlight and headlights. I'm dialing 3 phone numbers quickly and turn all the lights on around the outside of the house. And the police car arrived minutes later. I heard the helicopters overhead for the Coast Guard. And I would say within about 30 to 40 minutes, the Cape May K-9 team arrived, which was an officer and a bloodhound named Whiskey. Okay.
If I may ask you one question right now. Was your first inclination that you thought that she ran down to the beach? Was that I know she could have run anywhere, but did you think she went down to the water?
I figured she went to the water or she went away from the water. Those were our 2 options.
Okay.
So Paul was in the car going away from the beach. I turned the floodlights around the house, called the K-9 unit and the Coast Guard. So within a very short period of time, the police had arrived, the Ocean City police had arrived. The helicopters were overhead going up and down the ocean, with the floodlights looking for Renee. And the canine officer arrived with the bloodhound whiskey. So everything was happening very, very quickly. When the officers arrived from Ocean City.
What time would you say they got there?
Well, I called at 7:01. She left.
Mm-hmm.
So within 5 minutes, I had made my 3 phone calls.
Okay.
I would say by 7:10, the Ocean City Police Department had arrived. Moments later, I started to hear helicopters flying over the ocean from the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
And within 30 to 40 minutes, the officer and the bloodhound arrived. So things were happening very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you.
I said to the Ocean City Police Department, I first of all introduced myself as the sister of a missing person. I was a medical doctor and felt qualified to announce to them that this was a psychiatric emergency and had to be dealt with as an emergency. And they initially and immediately decided that Renee was a runaway and they would treat this as a runaway. And they said, was she ever formally diagnosed with a mental disorder or schizophrenia or paranoia? And I said that she had a history of panic disorder. She was not on any medication. She was not on any alcohol. And they immediately decided this was a runaway and they would treat it as such. I begged the Ocean City Police Department to stop all cars at the 3 island exits, at the Summers Point, Longport Bridge exit, which was the northernmost exit, at the 9th Street exit, and at the 34th Street exit, which was the southernmost. 3 police cars strategically located would have caught anyone, leaving the island. They said they would need a warrant for that activity, and they would not do it. It was a very cold, desolate, pitch black evening. There was very little traffic, probably less than 15,000 people on the barrier island at the time. And I felt that if she wasn't in the water, we could catch her and admit her. And I begged the OCPD to treat this as a psychiatric emergency, and they refused. Now, in the moments after they arrived and they were searching my house, they decided immediately she was a runaway and that she could be hiding in my own home. So they were looking in my closets, in my drawers, sifting through, my garage.
Private things.
Yeah, yes, my lingerie drawer. They were looking for her hiding within my home. So there was disbelief from my story as well as Renee's psychiatric emergency, which was very, very, upsetting to me at the onset.
And didn't they know that your friend Paul was out already on the street riding around?
They knew that they saw Paul speeding around in the car.
Okay.
At that point, I was disgusted with them and their assessment. I let them wander around my house with their flashlights and their notepads, and I went out onto the beach with my flashlights, big flashlights, and I was looking for footprints on the sand, and I saw none. And the Coast Guard was still patrolling. I saw the helicopters going up and down, and there were no footprints coming out of my door toward the beach. So the canine officer arrived with the bloodhound whiskey, and this was all happening very quickly. The Ocean City Police Department is filling out their report and looking around my house. And so the officer comes, the bloodhound comes, and he said, I need a photo of the missing person. I need a little bit of quick history, which I gave him. And he said, we need some article that the dog can sniff so that we can go back out and look for her. It's going to be very hard to scent in sub-zero weather with a wind chill factor of -12 that evening, because, you know, the wind is going to blow the scent around, so it's going to be very difficult to scent Whiskey. But Whiskey smelled one of the hospital-issued slippers Renee had dropped just I'd say a couple feet outside my door, heading toward the bay, away from the ocean, toward the streets, which gave us some direction. So he had the dog scent the slipper. He brought the slipper with him. I quickly gathered some photos that I had of Renee and handed them to him. And he went in his canine, vehicle with the dog to look around. And he called me, I would say, within 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And he said the robe that I had given her was found 1 block away from the ocean on Central Avenue. The robe was there at the curb line, not in the street, but just on the, pavement side of the curb line. And the dog sat there, smelled the robe, indicated to the officer that this was the scent that he had picked up from the slipper, sat next to the robe at the curb line on Central Avenue.
How long do you think if a person was to walk from your place to where the robe was found, how long do you think it would take to walk that? I know you say a block, but 2 minutes, 5 minutes, what do you think?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, thank you.
5 minutes. So I said, now what? And he said, she got in a car. No doubt in my mind. She got in a car. We're heading across the bridge. Now, there was no direction to where she was going, but the curb that she was on would be the direction that would be heading toward the 9th Street Bridge. So he said, I'm going over the 9th Street Bridge. I'm heading toward Summers Point. I said, go to the waterfront. He said, that was going to be my first stop, because when you go over the 9th Street Bridge, there's a gas station, there's a liquor store, there's a diner that was closed that evening, and then there's the waterfront restaurant and bar, which we knew, which she knew, which was the big establishment just over the bridge. So he and I were on the same page. The officers were inside my home filling out the report. The Coast Guard was still overhead. There were no prints on the beach. The robe was found on Central Avenue. So we're making progress. All right. Now, I'm calling my parents. They had just left Philadelphia and they had just arrived in Florida. They hopped in their car and they're driving 1,500 miles nonstop to come to Ocean City. And I would say approximately 11 p.m. Well, before that, 11 p.m., I received a phone call from the canine officer. But prior to that, I would say, around 9:30, 10, I called down to the Coast Guard. And I hadn't heard the helicopters for some time, and I asked them, and they said they were about to call me, that their search was not productive. They did not see any bodies on the beach or the shoreline. They didn't see any prints in the sand, and I confirmed that with my large flashlights outside my home.
No clothes or anything like that?
No clothes, nothing on the beach. It was their assessment that she did not run into the water. So everything was fitting. No prints, no evidence that she ran into the water. Curb line robe heading toward the other direction, and the officer now is looking for her with her photograph, with this story.
And is your friend Paul still out there? Or did he come back to the house after a while?
No, Paul's driving around, coming back to the house, driving around, coming back to the house, driving around.
Okay.
So he had come back, and I said, Central Avenue, and he said, I'm going up and down Central. I said, Paul, go in the homes around there. There were a lot of vacant homes, empty homes. This was a summer, shore resort. A lot of garages, abandoned backyard areas, sheds. I had suggested to him that he start from that block of Central Avenue where the robe was found, and just in case she didn't get in a car, start looking in some of the garages and homes. I said, if you see a light, stop. Knock on the door, inquire, So he was doing more of a ground search. He did not head over to Summers Point. Okay. Now, I get a phone call at about 11 o'clock, and it's the canine officer. And he said, I'm coming back to the house. I think we have some very valuable information. And I said, what is it? He said, your sister was at the waterfront at 8:30. It turns out at approximately 8:30 p.m. that same evening, Dolores Beck, our friend who was tending bar at the upper bar at the waterfront.
And this is the same location you were at that previous October for that get-together?
Previous September for Labor Day weekend, yes.
Okay.
Dolores Beck recalled seeing Renee. Beck was bartending that night at the upper bar of the waterfront restaurant in Summers Point, New Jersey. She said Renee was distraught and appeared agitated. She was wearing an oversized white sweatshirt. She sat at the bar, ordered a drink, did not touch the drink, and left within 20 minutes. Dolores, who knows me for many years, met Renee and Renee's boyfriend, Robert Sabary, and our family at the waterfront over Labor Day weekend in September of 1993. Dolores confirmed seeing Renee and confirmed the identity on the photographs that the officer had that I had given him. And it was pretty clear to both the canine officer and to Dolores that Renee was there that night. Okay. Mm. So Dolores said she knew something was wrong with Renee. She was going to call 911, but she was too busy working at the time. She regretted not calling 911. She was distracted. She was alone. She was very busy, and she didn't call. She met with my parents several times thereafter and expressed, sorrow and deep regret for not calling the police that night. Dolores Beck knew Renee. Renee was a person known to her. So according to police verbiage, a person known to them, this was, and it fit, a confirmed sighting. Mm-hmm. A confirmed sighting is a sighting of a person known to the person who cites the individual. Okay. But Ocean City Police Department denied that the sighting ever happened. They completely denied it.
When you say denied, do they mean that she is lying, or she thought it was somebody else, or how would you portray that?
They are not confirming this as a sighting.
Okay.
And this is was very frustrating to us as a family because it was pretty obvious. Everything fit. That was Renee that night. And it was a very important piece of information because we knew at 8:30 p.m. she was alive. And she was seen by someone who knew her and recognized her.
And did anybody I'm sure the canine officer didn't just talk to her. Did he talk to any of the other employees there?
The canine officer talked to everybody that was still there at 11 p.m.
Okay.
Which was very few people were still there. It was a bitter cold night, and most of the patrons had left. There might have been one or two people, along with Dolores, who was closing up that evening. But the two people that were still there in the upper bar hadn't seen her. Now, when you go in the front door of the waterfront, there's a hostess stand, and then there's steps going upstairs right to the upper bar. So Renee could have completely avoided the big lower restaurant and the lower bar by going upstairs. The upper bar is a very small area. The lower restaurant is huge. It's my impression from talking to the hostess. She remembers someone running up the steps, shortly within the time frame that we would expect, like, around 7:15 to 7:30. She remembers a woman, in a white sweatshirt, but she doesn't remember if she had socks or shoes on or anything else on. Okay. We don't know to this day if the person that gave her the ride, and we still don't know the person that gave her the ride, if that person who obviously gave her money, because Renee paid for the drink with $20, left a $5 tip, so left with, I think the drink was $7. She paid with $20, left a $5 tip. So Renee allegedly left with at least $8.
Okay.
That we think. Okay. But we know that she had no identification with her, no purse, nothing on her. We're certain of that. And that's the condition that she showed up in the ER, and that's the condition that she arrived in my home. We tried desperately, as did the canine officer, who was really extraordinary, to get information from the waterfront management. There were very few patrons there by the time the officer made the positive ID at 11 p.m. There were just a handful of people at the lower bar. There was staff there. There was the hostess. There was Dolores Beck and 2 patrons at the upper bar. And he went around showing Renee's pictures to everyone. And we, meaning the family, begged the Ocean City Police Department, as well as the management of the waterfront, to obtain, credit card records from the people that were there that night, and maybe a list, because the bartenders know the local people.
Sure.
They know who was there. We wanted a list of everybody that was there that night. We wanted to know if there was any surveillance cameras. We wanted to know if we could get any license plates or identification on any cars in the parking lot that night. We were desperate for information. We even wanted records from the payphones in the area. Ocean City Police wouldn't do any of this. They wouldn't help us get this information. Now, we had hired a retired FBI agent to get on the case from day 2, and he said that we really needed this information. So the first thing he did, Andy Sloan from Haddonfield, New Jersey, he went to the waterfront. He kind of, staked out the waterfront and the parking lot, and we took pictures of cars that were there. Subsequent evenings, desperately tried to get the credit cards that were used that evening to purchase food or drink. We tried to get a list of people that were there from the bartenders, but there was no cooperation. And all of this information had to come from the police.
Yeah.
And because Renee disappeared from Ocean City, New Jersey, even though she was a resident of Queens, New York, the Ocean City Police Department was considered the lead investigator. Now,
is it a different police jurisdiction over there at the waterfront? Would that be a totally different police? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That's Summers Point, New Jersey. That's
right.
Totally different.
Okay.
So, the first thing we did was we filled out a police report, and we got a New Jersey NCIC number. So her NCIC number for New Jersey is M7022-54323. But because she was a New York resident, we felt it was very important that we also file in New York. And we were assigned Robert Lewis, who is no longer, we've gone through many, many detectives over the past 24 years, but Robert Lewis was the first detective on the case from New York, and he assigned us a New York NCIC M702778-368. So we had two NCIC numbers, New York and New Jersey. And one of the problems that we had in Renee's case is that nobody wanted to own the case. Yeah. She disappeared from New Jersey, but she was a New York resident. So New Jersey really didn't want the case, and they felt, well, she made it to Summers Point. We don't have to deal with this anymore. And New York didn't want the case because she disappeared from New Jersey.
Yep.
So we had a lead investigator in New Jersey, and we had a lead investigator in New York. But they were not really committed to the case because they felt that they had an out.
That's right. It happens. To this day it happens. Yes.
And it happened.
Yes.
So here we are, a family on a mission to find a loved one, desperate, a psychiatric emergency, treated as a runaway. That evening, OCPD was delighted. They seemed greatly relieved to know that she was in the waterfront, but they didn't want to consider it a confirmed sighting. So it's a catch-22.
Yeah.
She's not in our backyard, but we're not going to go to bat for you, and we're going to be relieved that she's not here. But we're not going to confirm that she was there,
right.
So we're not going to stick our neck out. And I said, please, I'm begging you, notify the Summers Point Police Department, notify the Northfield Police Department, notify all the adjoining towns, north and south, that Renee is in the area. Please, I'm begging you. Go door to door. Look at abandoned properties and garages and vacant homes and help me. Summers Point is more of a year-round community. Ocean City is more of a resort and seasonal community. There were more people home in Summers Point. I said, please, please, Crime Stoppers, radio, TV, get me all the alerts and all the help you can get me. Please, please. It's sub-zero weather. She's going to be dead in about 10 minutes on the street. Help me, help me. They did nothing that night. Absolutely nothing. In fact, they were relieved she was off the island. I begged them to send out television, radio, and police alerts, regarding Renee Lamanna. They did not treat her as a high-risk endangered missing person. Almost every request was denied. Now, in the meantime, we as a family had done, an extraordinary job in getting the word out. We knew that we were alone in this. Nobody really wanted to take this on. New Jersey wasn't interested. New York didn't seem interested. And so we knew that if we didn't do it, it wasn't going to be done. But we did trust that they were going to do at least their police work to some extent. And that was really a fatal mistake because they really didn't do anything. And we didn't realize how little they did until many years later.
Let me ask you a couple questions about that night. So she's seen there. The K-9 officer comes back and says, yes, she was seen there. I guess he didn't find anywhere else that she might have gone to after she left there. I guess
he went up and down Bay Avenue, which is the street that the waterfront is on. He did the best he could to notify local jurisdictions, but unfortunately, he was off duty at 11 p.m. So he was winding down his shift, And it seemed like nobody was going to take this on.
And I'm also wondering if he allowed Whiskey the dog to get out there, and did he catch Renee's scent at that restaurant or bar, whatever, the waterfront? Did the dog pick up her scent, maybe going in or out of that place?
The dog was interested in the location, but he said because of the windshield factor and because of the temperature, he wasn't concerned that Whiskey didn't sit down next to the bar stool.
Okay.
He said there were too many interfering scents, as well as the cold outside.
Okay.
So Whiskey picked up the robe, and Whiskey seemed very interested in the second floor of the bar.
Okay.
But nothing specific.
Any more sightings of any other clothing or anything that night? It was just the robe.
Just the robe.
The robe. Okay.
Nothing else was dropped.
Okay. And one more question, and then we'll move on maybe to the next days and weeks after this. At any time, did her boyfriend, who I guess was breaking up with her, call you and say, you know what, Renee left, she blew out the door. Did he ever call that day or that evening to say that?
No, I called him.
Okay.
And I said, did you or did you not realize that Renee had left? And he said, I had dental surgery. I fell asleep. And when I woke up, she was gone. And that fit with, what we understood later on to have happened.
Okay.
Now, he did not drive the cab that night or the next day, but the following night he was out with the cab. By that time, we had already produced our first of hundreds of thousands of flyers. And we were a little bit concerned about him because we thought that she might come back to him and he might harm her.
Sure.
So we didn't want to give him too much information. We just wanted to keep him in the loop, and we wanted to send the retired FBI agent to interview him and to stake out his home rather quickly. So within a matter of days, we had his home was being staked out.
Okay. Good move.
We had people watching the comings and going of his home. We had asked the police to tap his phone, but they refused to do it.
Yeah. That's probably going a little far.
He was subsequently interrogated, and nothing came up of it. He said that their relationship was over, but he did not want to do her any harm.
And I should ask, being that you had, obviously you once again talked about this transformation that she was under while she was with him. At any point, do you think that he was ever physical with her or violent with her at all? Was it just the mental side of it?
No, it was a mental abuse, never a physical abuse.
Okay. All right.
Now, I've spent 24 years looking for Renee, and I'll get to some more specifics. And my parents suffered greatly. They died looking for Renee.
Yes.
Our mother was a Tisch School PhD from NYU, and she hired an NYU Iranian graduate student to call and question every single number in Renee's address book of her multilingual Arab, Afghan, Portuguese, friends. We hired a retired FBI agent. I mentioned that, Andrew Sloan of Haddonfield, New Jersey, and multiple private investigators. We advertised, mailed, faxed, and hung hundreds of thousands of flyers. We produced a video that aired nationally in the U.S. post offices. We visited homeless shelters undercover. We wrote to agencies, emergency departments, hospitals, mental health clinics, politicians, celebrities, radio stations, television stations, and newspapers. Renee's case aired on Unsolved Mysteries and Crime Stoppers. We set up a toll-free number and a reward. By the way, the toll-free number is
Renee 11. Renee is RENEE 888 RENEE 11.
Okay.
So we set up a toll-free number and a reward. We contact the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, hospitals, mental health clinics, homeless shelters, truck stops, bus stations, transit authorities, churches, mosques, libraries, bookstores, thrift stores, missions, and soup kitchens. I used social media, and her story went viral on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google+, Instagram, and Tumblr. We've had
things
over
came
10
around,
million hits.
Yeah, once those things came around, of course, this was 1994, but yes, eventually, of course.
Eventually, yes. And of course, HIPAA came into effect, the Health Care, Privacy and Portability Act came into effect 2 years after Renee's disappearance. And that is a major roadblock to finding Renee, because many ER doctors will tell me, Dr. Lamanna, if your sister is lying here on a stretcher, I can't tell you. And many of the good nurses and doctors in the mental health clinics and in the hospitals, as well as prisons, have told me that if Renee is here for any reason, and I have no reason to think that she would be in prison, but if Renee is in any institution, we will not be able to tell you. So that is extremely frustrating. We did everything that we possibly could. And we've been doing everything that we possibly could do. We later found out that, I think in desperation, the Ocean City Police Department turned the case over to the Cape May County Prosecutor's Office. And in June of 2013, let me go back. New Jersey has not pursued any of the leads. We found out that there were many hits on Renee's both New Jersey and New York NCIC number. And these were not aggressively pursued. The New Jersey police have not pursued the leads. They've doubted every sighting so far. And there were many hits on her New York and New Jersey NCIC numbers.
What does that mean, hits? Can you explain hits to the listeners, please? Hits. What does that mean?
Hits means that somebody sees in the database, a potential match. Now, the NCIC is one of the 5 databases that we use. It's the National Crime Information Center database. Other ones we use are CODIS, which is Combined DNA Index System for Missing Persons. We use IFAS, which is Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System. And, we use VICAP, which is the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and we use NamUs, which is the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. And I'll get into that. Renee, unfortunately, was not entered into NamUs until much later, and NamUs was started in 2007.
It's relatively new.
Yeah, it's a relatively new repository. It's a centralized repository and resource center for missing persons and unidentified decedent records. And Renee's NamUs number is missing person number 1232. And Todd Matthews of NamUs has been very helpful, and I'll get to that in a minute about what information is on NamUs. But back to the National Crime Information Center. Any information maintained by the FBI and supporting federal, state, and local criminal justice agencies is put on the NCIC. And it's just really a database. It's an information center.
Okay.
So Renee is an M, which means she's a missing person, and she has a number in New Jersey and New York. And on that number, it has pictures of Renee. Her height is 5 feet 2 inches tall. Her weight is 98 pounds. Her hair is brown. Her eyes are brown, and she's petite. This information is on there. So a hit means that somebody is looking for a white female, 5 feet 2 inches tall, brown hair, brown eyes, and that would constitute a hit.
Okay.
So somebody might have actually had Renee or thought they had Renee, and it generated a hit, which is not a guaranteed Renee, but it's certainly a probability and should have been pursued. And we find out there were many, many hits on both of her New York and NCIC numbers, and these weren't aggressively pursued. Now, my parents, my mother died in 2003. My father died in 2013. DNA from me, my mother, and my father was not collected. And the reason the DNA was not collected, and in the case of it was collected from me very, very late, was because the police had lost Renee's DNA. I had given them a hairbrush filled with many hair follicles. I had given them Renee's dental chart, dental x-rays, and an elbow film, an elbow x-ray. They lost her hairbrush and her hair follicles. They lost the dental x-rays, and they lost the elbow x-ray. All we had at this point was a description of a white female, 5 feet 2 inches tall, brown hair, brown eyes, and a dental chart. We had no DNA. So I would say the first thing that should have been done was my DNA, my mother's DNA, and Renee's DNA should have been put on CODIS, which is the Combined Index DNA system for missing persons, and it wasn't done. Now, I got a phone call, and I think the reason it wasn't done was because either they weren't very knowledgeable about DNA or they did not want to admit that the DNA was missing. But I got a phone call 13 years after her disappearance requesting for a buccal swab from me, which is, just a Q-tip inside the cheek, to render some DNA.
Yes.
So, okay, on October 15th of 2007, a swab inside my cheek for DNA as close as same-sex relative for Renee to be submitted on CODIS. This was also added to NamUs. Renee was listed on NamUs on December 12th of 2008. NamUs was in existence since 2007, but there were no requests for DNA from my mother, who had died in 2003, and my father, who had died in 2013. I submitted the DNA, and on 12/12/08, and as I told you, NamUs is a centralized repository and resource center for missing persons and unidentified deceased remains. Right. She was also registered with the Charlie Project and the Doe Network. She was supposedly registered with VICAP, but we're not so sure about that, and we don't have any confirmation on that. Now, on December 22nd, there was a phone call that came into the toll-free number.
Let me ask, let's just go back, if we could, just for a second, Margaret. So after that night of January 8th, 1994, you have no idea what happened to your sister. You have a belief that she got picked up by somebody. The person, I guess, felt sorry for her, gave her some money. She goes into this waterfront, orders this drink, leaves a tip, leaves there, and then after that, gone, just gone.
No information whatsoever. But, you must do it all yourself. You must make sure that NCIC reports are filed immediately. you must make sure that all the DNA is collected from within your home and from without. You must make sure that your loved one is entered into all of the databases and that the flyers are gotten out, that all of the alerts are put out, that if this person is endangered missing, that the protocols for endangered missing persons be followed. None of this was done in Renee's case.
So
none of it was.
All right, so obviously after January 8th, 1994, no sign of her, anything. What are you thinking the rest of 94 as, of course, you're doing all these things that you've talked about with the flyers and everything else, but, not getting any leads? Are you thinking that she just ran off into New Jersey or something?
I always thought that she would be heading back to New York.
Okay.
She didn't like New Jersey, and New York was always her favorite location. So I did not think she would go back to their home. I thought, though, that she would probably stay in the New York area, and she was very knowledgeable about Manhattan and New York. So I thought that she would probably be in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, Staten Island, in the exact proximate neighborhood near him.
I guess that brings us to December 1994.
The possibility always existed that she was going to come back to their home, which was on 18902 64th Avenue in Fresh Meadows. And we also kept a watch on the place in Philadelphia in Society Hill Towers, where we had a residence as a family for many, many years, because she knew that address, she lived there, she was comfortable there. So any location that Renee was familiar with, the home in Philadelphia, the home where she lived with the boyfriend in Fresh Meadows, and also Scranton, Pennsylvania, where we grew up, was on our radar. Now, Renee had lived in Seattle, and she had lived in Atlanta, and of course, Manhattan and Queens, Philadelphia. These were the locations, and she was born in Scranton. So these were on our radar. We were constantly vigilant about those locations. We did the best we could to keep those areas on alert, but we did not have police-wide notification. Nobody from law enforcement was doing a fraction of the work that we as a family were doing, and it was exhausting. I mean, it was nonstop.
I bet. So tell the listeners about December 1994. What happened then?
Well, got a phone call from the on the toll-free line, and my mother got the phone call actually. On December 22nd of 1994, my mother received on the toll-free line a phone call from a gentleman named Jim Bricks, who we are still in contact with, Jim and his sister Linda, wonderful people. Jim worked for NYNEX, which is the New York telephone company. And Jim was riding the number 1 subway train from Midtown Manhattan towards Staten Island, heading south on the number 1. And he was sitting in the subway, and there was a woman across the aisle from him who resembled Renee, and the flyers were hanging in the subway. Remember, we had this exhaustive flyer campaign, and we had hundreds of thousands of flyers all over the place, and we paid several private detectives simply to keep the subways refreshed, because we knew that Renee was very conversant with the public, with the subway system, with public transportation above and below ground, with New Jersey Transit, with the casino bus system coming into Atlantic City. So we were on it. We were on
the bus and the subway systems, and we spent a lot of money and a lot of time keeping flyers refreshed in those locations. So here you have this man who's going to work, who's sitting on the number 1 subway, looking at a woman who looks just like the flyer that's hanging in the subway. And she's getting increasingly nervous because she sees him looking at her, and he's looking at the flyer, and he's looking at her, and she's looking at him, and she's looking at the flyer, and he said she was getting nervous. And she exited on the next exit, which was the Chambers Street exit. Now, the significance of the Chambers Street exit is that Renee used to work on Chambers Street, and she worked in a chocolate candy store on Chambers Street and a couple of other locations on Chambers Street. So we don't know if she was heading to Staten Island, which was the final destination of number 1 subway train, or if she was actually getting off on Chambers Street to do something. But Jim Bricks called my mother and said, I'm sure it's her. And she was wearing a navy blue pea coat, a black skirt just below the knee, black cloth Chinese rubber sole ballet slippers, the type you buy in a New York street vendor. And she looked clean. She didn't look homeless. She had shoulder-length hair. She was not wearing a hat or a headscarf.
Did she look anorexic, did he say, being that was one of her issues?
She looked thin, but she didn't look particularly malnourished. She looked thin, and he thought she looked about 100 pounds. Okay. And she had the backpack, the pea coat, the black skirt below the knee, and the slippers. And she got nervous because she thought maybe he was onto this, that she was that person, and she got off somewhat hurriedly. And he ran after her, and then he thought, no, I'm going to call the number. So he called the number. And he talked to my mother, and he said, I'm certain I saw your daughter. I'm certain I saw this Renee person. And he described the situation, and my mother was frantic. And she called me. And I called the police precinct on the closest police precinct on Chambers Street. And I faxed them more flyers and reminded them of her New York NCIC number. And, we did everything we possibly could. I called the Ocean City police detective. I called the New York police lead detective there, called the police departments in the area, called friends and family that were in the area, sent them down with thousands of more flyers. I said, you really have to, paper Chambers Street, called up the private detective. I said, you've got to paper Chambers Street. My parents jumped in their car. They were in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. They drove 1,500 miles nonstop to meet with Jim Bricks. We tried to do our best to get Chambers Street, alerted to the possibility that Renee was there. The police, I called them. They didn't know what I was talking about. I said, she's a missing person. Call Detective Robert Lewis. She has an NCIC number in New York. I gave them the NCIC number. They seemed very disinterested in this. I said, please, can you patrol Chambers Street? Can you look for a woman fitting this description? They said, no, she was not a harm to herself or others. They didn't have any indication that she was an emergent case. And, if they happened upon her, they might call me, but otherwise, no. So my parents are in the car. They're driving north. To this day, I'm in communication with Jim Bricks and his sister, Linda.
Was this, I should just wait, what time of day was this? Was the subway car crowded? Was he going to work? Was he coming home from work?
He was going to work, and it was crowded.
Okay.
What he imparted to me was a sense of agitation.
Yeah.
that he was sitting across the aisle from her, looking at her, looking at the flyer, looking back at her. She figured it out, and she wanted to get out of there fast. He got the sense that she had put it together. She was uncomfortable with his glares.
Yeah.
He regretted not talking to her. And he said, I debated in my own mind, should I grab her or not? And he didn't want to enter into a combative situation working for the telephone company. He didn't want to lose his job. He didn't want to be sued. He was nervous about it. He was certain it was her. He called the toll-free number, and he stayed around in the area, you know, and I said, would you give this report to the police? And he did.
Okay.
The police seemed very disinterested. I mean, he was committed. He wasn't like, look, I'm out of here, I'm going to work. He wanted to see this through. And he made himself available to my parents when they got up there. They met him. And he spent a lot of time with them. And he's called and emailed many, many times over the 24 years. His sister said he was totally moved by the experience. It was earth-shaking, you know, for him. This whole thing was upsetting, and he felt very emotionally involved in it.
Was that maybe the first time, once again, this would have been December 1994, she disappeared January 1994, so it's almost a year, approximately 11 months. Was that the first?
It was 11 months, yeah. It was the first, and it gave us hope. I mean, it was a Christmas gift. We thought it was a sign, you know, that she was alive. And it was December 22nd, you know?
Yeah.
It was the day before our grandmother's birthday. We thought it was, you know, significant that it was Christmas time, and that we felt it just re-energized. Not that for a second we had stopped this mission, because we were this was a 24/7 campaign.
Sure.
We had recruited all kinds of people. We were hanging flyers every day. I was running around with at least at any given time, I had about 100 flyers with me. We were all armed with flyers. Everybody was hanging flyers. I mean, we were on a mission to find her. But this was great hope. We were so happy.
But unfortunately, it didn't seem to lead anywhere. After that day, I guess he never saw her on the subway, or nobody else did. And, I mean, you know, talking to people maybe on Chambers Street, I guess it was.
Well, think about this, though, Ed.
Yeah.
Maybe she didn't know her name at that point, or maybe
Possible.
she had assumed another identity. Remember, she had no ID with her. Renee had no credit cards and no bank account. She has never used the name Renee Lamanna in 24 years. She's not using her Social Security number. She had no driver's license. She had nothing on her. I have all of her ID cards. I have her Bronx Community College ID. I have her last activated, driver's license. I have her last unused passport. I have everything. We've checked her Social Security number and her name. She has not used it in 24 years. So we thought, okay, she's dead, but now someone sees her. She's not using her name. They don't have her DNA out there. They've lost it. She doesn't know who she is, or she's not using her name. They don't have enough information out there on her. All we have is a dental chart. That's only valuable if she's dead in a morgue. But if she's alive, struggling on the streets and not using her name, or doesn't know her name, or has amnesia, how are we going to identify her? There are a lot of 5 feet 2 inch tall, brown-haired, brown-eyed white women running around.
You're right. What about, but the thing is, you had another sighting, though, not too long after that, but in a totally different area.
Yeah, and 5 months later, in May of 1995, I get a phone call from a Harry McCrickard at the Chrysler Plymouth Jeep dealership on Tilton Road in Northfield, New Jersey. And Harry said Renee walked into the showroom. She was wearing a navy blue pea coat, black skirt below the knee, black ballet cotton slippers, and a backpack.
So same description as the subway the months before. Same clothes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this time she looked disheveled, and she looked like she might be homeless, and she was dirty, and she was catatonic and disoriented and a bit agitated at times. And she walked up to him and she said, "I need a ride. Would you give me a ride to New York?" And he looked at her like, "I'm going to leave my job and give you a ride to New York?" He said, "I thought, maybe." He was a former psychiatric social worker, and now he was a car salesman. And he said, "I have a background in psychiatric social work. I thought she was crazy or on drugs." He said, "I didn't know what her MO was, but I thought she was crazy or on drugs." And I said, "Renee doesn't drink or do drugs." And he said, "Well, then she was catatonic schizophrenic." He said, "That was my diagnosis." But she looked right through me. She did not make eye contact. He said she asked him to give her a ride. And he said, "No, I'm not going to leave my job and drive you to New York." And she said, "Well, then, would you give me $20 to buy a ticket to get back to," she said, "to get back to New York?" And he said, "No, I'm not going to give you $20. And she said, "Well, I have a hairdryer here in my backpack. I'll give you this hairdryer for $20 to buy a ticket to get back to New York." And he said, "No." And then she left the showroom. And then he saw the flyer in the Hoot, WHOOT, which was a weekly free paper that was distributed. And he called the toll-free number, and he called the Northfield, New Jersey police right down the road from him, right next to Summers Point, right next to Ocean City. They had no idea about Renee Lamanna missing person. They didn't know what he was talking about.
Wow.
So my parents got in the car. They didn't tell Harry when they were getting there because they didn't know if they were going to spend the night or not, or how, because they were up in age. They drove straight through. They get into the showroom unannounced, and Harry comes right over to my mother and says, "You're the mother." And my mother said, "The mother of who?" And he said, "You're the mother of the girl, the missing girl, the Renee Lamanna." And she broke out in tears, and she said, "Yes, I'm the mother." And they hugged, and my parents sat with him at his desk in the showroom, and they talked for quite some time. I've met Harry. Harry's called over the years many, many times. He's no longer at the Chrysler Plymouth Jeep dealership. He's moved around. He worked for Honda, and he's now at Seville Motorsports. But I met him, and he came to our 24th anniversary press meeting on January 8th of this past year. And he cried, and he said, "Look, she's out there. She's out there. I believe it. She's out there. Don't give up hope." I saw her with my own eyes. I am sure it was her. I don't for a minute have any doubt. Don't give up hope. And he and Jim Bricks have been a source of inspiration. So after that experience, of course, we covered Tilton Road. We covered Northfield. I mean, we canvassed the area. We walked up and down. We put flyers all over the place. We were very upset that Ocean City did not get the word to Northfield. We were really upset that they didn't make that phone call to the neighboring, jurisdiction.
Of course.
But, I mean, here we are, We have two sightings. She disappears on January 8th of 94. We have a sighting on December 22nd of 94. And in May of 1995.
Let me ask you a little bit about the car dealership sighting. Did this salesman know about her disappearance before he saw her?
No.
Or he didn't know it. And then it was, a day later, a week later that he saw something in the paper?
A couple days later, he saw that Hoot, and he made the phone call. My parents got in the car. I got on the airplane, and we were on it. We didn't lose much time in the Northville, New Jersey area. As soon as we made the connection, we canvassed the area very aggressively.
Okay. And was anybody else in the showroom that day that saw her as well? But I think you're the only person you had any interaction with, but were there any other people?
There was a manager and assistant manager in their cubicles behind the showroom. There might have been some people looking at cars that day, but we did not get any surveillance, and we did not get any surveillance from the subway either. And the reason many of these places didn't have surveillance cameras back then,
of course,
and those that didn't have it available, or they had it on 24-hour erasable loops, so we had missed it. Or what we were told and have been told frequently is unless law enforcement requests it, it's not available. So just like we didn't get the payphone records in Somers Point, New Jersey on January 8th, and we didn't get the credit cards used at the waterfront restaurant on January 8th, or surveillance from that parking lot with cars that were there that evening, or surveillance inside the restaurant or the bar, we didn't get any surveillance around the Tilton Road area. And we had begged each and every establishment for outdoor surveillance.
Right.
Because anything, if we had seen that image, the pea coat, the skirt, a short white woman, anything would have been very valuable to us. But we were fighting against all odds. We had nothing. And in February, February of 2015, I got a phone call from a well-intentioned woman in Virginia who said she saw my sister. But after 11 months, that lead turned out not to be Renee. And we have identified, met with, and continue to help that missing person. But
before you met that woman, how convinced were you that might have been Renee?
Well, unfortunately, and again, well-intentioned people, we don't want anybody to not make a phone call or to not give us, information. So I say this with reservation. These people meant well. They did not mean any harm. But they said that she said her name was Renee Lamanna, and she did not say her name was Renee Lamanna. They said that she was looking for her family for a long time and couldn't understand why they didn't find her. This woman never said Renee Lamanna, and she is estranged from her family and doesn't want to have any communication with them. So that misinformation, coupled with similarities of height, weight, and appearance, and personal likes of food and beverage and such, and colors, allowed us to go on this 11-month hunt, which was not without merit, because it raised awareness about Renee's case, about missing persons, and allowed us to meet a wonderful woman in need who we've been able to help. So I don't feel that
during those 11 months, though, were you thinking it was Renee, or were you kind of like, well, I
was praying it was Renee, because they told us, she said her name was Renee Lamanna, and that she was looking for her family for a long time and couldn't understand why they couldn't find her. Without those pieces of information, I wouldn't have thrown my heart and soul into it, because the resemblance, although close, wasn't that close. And the only images I want out there are images that we know are Renee.
Right.
And the images that we know are Renee are on Renee Lamanna page on Facebook, or Renee Lamanna Missing and Lost Far Too Long, which is her community page on Facebook. We only want to put out there images that we know are her.
Okay.
Because otherwise the confusion was extraordinary and difficult. But 888-RENEE-11 is the toll-free number. There is a reward. We're asking people to go on Renee's page on Facebook
Renee Lamanna, missing, and Renee Lamanna, missing and gone far too long. If they ever see, or if they have any information, if they see or have any information, to please call 888 Renee Lamanna. 888 Renee 11. And the page is, I just want to clarify, it's Renee Lamanna, missing and lost far too long. And that's on Facebook. And then there's a Renee Lamanna page that is not a community page, but there are many, many pictures of Renee.
Sure.
There's a picture just before she disappeared, and that's and then we have an age progression. So we have an age 34 and an age 59 computer-generated age progression. And I think that if we remember, that Renee is 5'2", brown hair, brown eyes, and not using her name, not using her Social Security number, possibly disoriented or confused, that would be very helpful. I've had theories about where she is and what she's doing.
You've told me.
I've discussed them
you've
with
told
you.
me. Yes.
Yeah, Renee could be an assumed identity. She could be back in the New York area, which could be very, very likely. Before 9/11, she could have gotten out of the country with a fake ID. After 9/11, impossible. Absolutely impossible. She could be dead, but they tell me with name is 1232, and even with a dental chart and my DNA on CODIS for her, if she is in a morgue or unidentified, we should be able to have a positive ID. If she's disposed of, as you had, mentioned, identity may be, difficult,
right,
or impossible. But we are hopeful. Renee is very intelligent and very resourceful and very street smart. So we're hopeful, that we may be able to find her.
If I can ask, how you've told me that her ex-boyfriend, the guy who was breaking up with her in 1994, he has eventually did help you. He's been very instrumental. Drove you around or something at one point.
Yeah, he married shortly after her disappearance to an Afghan woman. And he always told Renee, he said, you're not Afghan. And she said, well, I'm, studying the Quran. I'm, cooking vegan. I'm vegetarian. I'm praying 5 times a day. It was obviously not enough. It was definitely culturally not enough. But he did marry an Afghan woman. He had a baby girl. He divorced her, remarried her, had another child. I don't know if he's married to the same woman or not. But in June of 2015, Team Renee, which is a group of 10 wonderful women that have a relationship with Renee or my mother or me, and have helped propagate this campaign. A couple members from Team Renee, especially Melissa Bradley, who is a missing persons advocate, accompanied me and my husband to New York City. And that was the week of June 24th of 2015. And Quadratula Robert Sabary, the boyfriend, in his medallion taxi minivan, picked us up at Port Authority and took us to over 150 locations in Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, agencies, shelters, missing persons, police departments, places they used to go to, multicultural places, mosques, places that she was very familiar with, the Bronx Community College, all over. We covered Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and Staten Island in one frenzied week, working over 12 hours a day, and he dedicated that whole week. He didn't drive the cab. He drove us. And he cried, when we embraced him, when we met him. And he said, she was an angel.
and I should have married her. And she was the love of my life. And my father, who came over from Afghanistan, said, Robert, you should marry this woman. She is the most wonderful and the most religious and the sweetest and kindest person he had ever met. And it broke his heart, really, that they didn't get married. So he seemed to be very emotionally engaged and sincerely involved and dedicated nearly a week to this massive effort. And we covered.
Yeah, I guess it's safe to say you do not suspect him at all in Renee's disappearance at all, whether she possibly made it the whole way back to his place that night or the next day or whatever. You don't believe that ever happened?
I do not believe that she ever came back to their apartment.
Okay.
I do believe that there were people in the building who reported to us that Renee was very, very depressed and paranoid. He later reported to us that she had auditory hallucinations, that she was hearing voices, but this could have been because of her extreme anorexia and metabolic instability, as well as an indication of a serious mental illness. So again, we cannot characterize except to say that this was a severe, acute psychiatric emergency on January 8th of 1994, and whether it was precipitated by anorexia and metabolic issues or was a true innate schizophrenic disorder, we do not know. But we know that it was a psychiatric emergency and it should have been dealt with as such. I'm hopeful and always see or think they have seen her, or if they have any information whatsoever, 888-RENEE-11. That's RENEE 11. Please call. There is a reward. Any information is valuable to us. And
okay.
We ask your listeners to look at the images of Renee on her Facebook community page as well as her Facebook page. If they think they have seen Renee or they have any information whatsoever, please call the toll-free number 888-RENEE-11, 888-RENEE-11, and there is a reward. Ed, we appreciate everything that you're doing to locate missing persons, to disseminate this critical information. And again, if there's any benefit that can be derived from this case, it's to empower missing families with the information they need to aggressively pursue finding their missing person. Do not trust that everything is being done.
That's true.
Make sure that everything is being done, that all the databases are being entered, that your missing person is treated as an endangered missing person if in case they are endangered, and pursue it aggressively.
Margaret, thank you for those kind words. We're doing the best we can here at Unfound, and I hope that my listeners can help you out. Obviously, I have a lot of listeners in New Jersey and New York. In fact, we've covered quite a few cases from both those states. So I'm hopeful.
I appreciate this opportunity, and I am grateful for all that you are doing at Unfound to solve these missing persons cases, and thank you.
And Margaret, I appreciate that, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Unfound. And that was my interview with Margaret Lamanna, sister of Renee Lamanna. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. I also need to thank Margaret for her patience as we fought through some cell phone reception issues during the interview. I don't quite get the same strong signal here in Pennsylvania like I do in Florida. This is a difficult case. I mean, they're all difficult. But being that this happened on an island, all the resources were there to find Renee in a very short time. But that didn't happen. Yes, the Coast Guard showed up for the sea and air, and the canine found the robe. But the police officers should have done exactly as Margaret stated, and they could have done so without needing a warrant. Simply eyeing the cars as they passed over the bridges would have been enough. But they didn't. And I'm sure all of you will discuss the sightings of Renee. I'll be interested to hear your opinions on them. But what caught my ear was this. Ocean City, New Jersey, according to Margaret, was deserted at that time of year. Yet Renee seemingly got picked up within minutes, and the person drove her to Summers Point and gave her the $20 to spend at the waterfront. But in 24 years, this Good Samaritan has never come forward, never made a call to any of the phone numbers, not even an island rumor that made it back to the Lamannas, despite this person surely knowing that the woman picked up that night went missing shortly after. Sure, there could be reasons for this. But why do all those good things on the night of January 8th, 1994 for the woman from the island, then remain silent in trying to find her, which would be the best Good Samaritan act of all? It's hard to understand. With that, I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.